Hello, in this video I'm going to be reading the books shortlisted for the Post Irish Book of the Year Award. There are 8 books on this shortlist, but I have already read 2 of them, which is Wild Houses by Colm Barrett and Intermezzo by Sally Rooney. So I will put those previous book reviews in here now. Then Wild Houses by Colm Barrett was the next one, and this is about a small-time crime. That is the word I want, but it sounds silly. The time crime in a small town in Ireland, in County Mayo. And we begin with a guy whose mother has died, left him this house, and he is in there all on his own, but his cousins kind of use it as a base as part of their drug dealing. And they turn up with this boy and are like, we've kidnapped this guy, you're gonna have to keep him here. And then we also see from the perspective earlier on, before the kidnap, of this guy's girlfriend, who's just desperate to get out of the town. I don't think it was doing anything particularly interesting or particularly new in terms of the way that it was written. Lovely. It described someone's face as like was it like a broken down church? Like a vandalised church, having a face like a vandalised church, which I thought was a line that was gorgeous. And it does have some really wonderful, lovely turns of phrase. But overall, it was just a bit like fine, well structured, nothing interesting, kind of, and kind of petered out with a bit of a whimper at the end there. So definitely one. It's a debut, and so I think this is a writer I would read again. It has the kind of dark, sarcastic humour that you expect from an Irish writer, the kind of well-known moments of lyricism with moments of pure cuttingness that a lot of Irish writers have, and I think I would definitely read from this author again. But not one of my favourites. So I thought I had already reviewed Intermezzo somewhere and was going to be able to cut a clip in, but I haven't. So I'm going to have to talk to you about it because I read it a long time ago. I did make a whole video about Sally Rooney, which I'll leave linked to the cards above if you haven't seen it yet. But that isn't really a review of Intermezzo, although I do talk about it a little bit. This is about 2 brothers, Peter and Ivan. Peter is in his mid-30s, Ivan is in his early 20s. And just before the book began, they lost their father. Peter is a lawyer and is dealing a lot with the grief and with feeling a sense of who he should be and of performing correctly in society. He is still in love with a woman he was in a relationship with in his 20s who was in a car accident, and is also in a relationship with a woman in her early 20s who is squatting in a house and does kind of OnlyFans on the side to make some money. And Ivan is someone who was a chess prodigy as a child and teen, but has in recent years been struggling with his chess. He travels to do a chess tournament in a rural part of Ireland. As always happens in Sally Rooney, we have the town, they both live in Dublin, and the rural. He meets there Marianne, who is a woman in her mid-30s, similar to Peter's age, who had been in a relationship, had been married in the past. The rural-urban divide, the class dynamics, Irish culture and history, all wrapped up as you expect in Sally Rooney. The parts from Ivan's perspective are written in Sally Rooney's kind of standard script, evocative of the places she is describing, the people. They are very good at getting into the mental space, the head. It's basically her signature style. Peter's perspective is kind of an homage to James Joyce, very much present tense, without necessarily pronouns and stuff. Things are written as fragments. Coldness and harshness, but also it's a lot faster and a lot more anxiety inducing. I did enjoy this book. I know it's been some people have been like, it's her masterpiece, and some people have really didn't like it. But for me, I thought that this was really good, and I really enjoyed it. I liked the look of grief. I think 2024 has been my year of grief in terms of books. I've read so many books about grief this year. If you go and watch that video that I talked about, it's about the proletarianization of the professional managerial class, the kind of power dynamics within these relationships, the idea of dependency and releasing oneself from the idea of self-sufficiency. Break between the 2 styles worked well for me, and it really evoked the fragmentary nature of Peter's consciousness in response to grief, like the way that he has kind of is tightly holding himself together. And yeah, overall, I really enjoyed it. I thought it was very interesting and very kind of subtle. I feel like it's a book that would gain a lot from a second read, and I am glad that I read that one. So I am partway through 3 of the books now, and 2 of those are sequels to books I haven't read. The Woman Behind the Door by Roddy Doyle is the 3rd in his series about Paula Spencer, and then the other one is an audiobook I'm listening to, Long Island by Colm Toibin, which is the sequel to Brooklyn. I think that both of them are at least more than 10 years since the last book came out, and so they're sequels, but they're it's a loose sequel. It's much easier to read them as standalones than it would be with some other sequels. There's not huge amounts of plot linkage. It's just okay, these women, both in Brooklyn, Ailish in Brooklyn and Paula in The Woman Behind the Door, are now older. They're both middle-aged, or I think Ailish is younger than Paula, but they're both Ailish is in her 40s, Paula is in her 60s, and it's just showing how their lives have changed and things weren't necessarily how they expected them to pan out, based on what happened in the earlier books. So Paula Spencer, in The Woman Behind the Door, this is set in 2020, 2021. It starts in 2021, and it's going up. I'm at 2023 now. So it is about Paula during COVID, but it is also reminiscing on her life with her ex-husband who died, Charlo, who was abusive, which I believe is what the other books are about, and also her daughter now, who has come and dropped a bomb on her, and her relationships with her children, how strained they are due to Paula's previous addiction issues. Roddy Doyle is famously a funny writer, and I would say that this definitely has some dark humour in it, and Paula herself, the voice that she is writing from, is a very funny voice, and it is also interesting to be reading 2 men writing to women, in the voices of these 2 women. A really well crafted novel so far. It is not plot based at all. We are very much in Paula's head and following her thoughts as she reminisces and relates things to the present, and there's a whole big section of her when she nearly gets knocked over by a Deliveroo driver because she's looking at a dead pigeon, of gentle politics, how politics touches on people's everyday lives. So it's a state of the nation book, I suppose, in a very mild, understated way. Both Doyle and Toibin are grandees of the Irish literary scene, but I have not read any Roddy Doyle for adults before. When I was a child, I read was it The Giggler Treatment and How Rover Saved Christmas, which were his 2 books for children, and it's not as funny as I was expecting. I think his most famous book, he's got The Commitments, which got turned into a film, and then Paddy Clark, Ha Ha Ha, which won the Booker, and The Commitments definitely is, I think, a lot funnier, but I'm enjoying it anyway. So the Long Island by Colm Toibin is about Ailish Lacey, who in Brooklyn in the 50s moved to New York, but in this book she is now older. She has 2 children with her Italian-American husband and her Italian-American family, and again something has come up, something has happened right at the beginning of the book that has thrown her life into chaos, it's destabilised her, and her mum is also turning 80, so she travels back to Ireland to spend some time with her mum. And this is set in the 1970s. Read The Magician by Colm Toibin, which was very different because it was about Thomas Mann, and so set in Germany and Switzerland in the turn of the 19th to the 20th centuries up until the Second World War. So it was a different historical time period and very different characters, and it is again very slow moving, very character driven. Toibin is a really great writer. He can draw such emotion from very simple writing, which I very much enjoy. It's my preferred style, I think, generally, is this powerful simplicity over floralness or anything like that. So I am enjoying both of them. I think there is a lot about gender in Long Island as well, the treatment of women in 1970s Ireland and America, and Catholicism and its relationship with women. So there's a lot going on in that. The other one that I'm reading is different. It is Heart Be at Peace by Donal Ryan, and this is set in this one is more similar to, if I was to pair this with one of the other books on this long list, it would be Wild Houses, in that it is set in a small town in, I believe, the west of Ireland, and there is a lot about drug gangs in this. So it is told in each chapter is a different person who is living in this small town, and it is their relationship with the town, with one another, these kind of interpersonal issues, but also how they kind of all lead back to the organised crime and the drug gangs. I'm really sorry if that's loud. I've just realised that extractor fan is probably really distracting. Anyway, so it is based on that, and this one is very voicey. There's a lot of different voices, and they are quite differentiated from one another. I would say I think Donal Ryan is a poet. There feels like there's sort of a poeticness to the style of the writing in this one, but it is feeling perhaps a little more melodramatic than the other two. The other two are definitely much more understated, and obviously this, I would say, is more melodramatic even than Wild Houses, though Wild Houses, it felt like it could have gone further and been more dramatic. So I feel like maybe it will be building to some sort of event, some sort of final event. There was one perspective that I found really quite interesting. It was told from the perspective of this person who was had a carer because of his mental health issues. His way of writing, very paranoid, being very confused as to what was going on, and then that being brought back with a different character later on, and kind of explained, but in a way that didn't feel like too heavy-handed or holding my hand. I think that was well done. So those are the three that I have read half of so far. We're in the middle of a very big storm at the moment. Mostly it's the wind that's bad, but that's why it is, despite the fact it is like 1:30 in the afternoon, it is very, very dark right now. But I will get back to reading and talk to you about the rest of the books in a bit. So I have come to Cumbria to see my boyfriend's family, and we went on some really nice walks, but it is now like 8 in the morning, but there is no light because we are so far north, and it is December, 1st of December now. So, but I have finished 3 of the books on this long list, and I want to talk to you about them. So, Heart Be at Peace by Donal Ryan. I enjoyed the writing of this. I liked it much more once I started listening to the audiobook rather than the reading the physical copy. I think that there is something about the way that the audiobook was a full cast, so all of the voices were different, that really lent itself to this book. It kind of builds this image of a town that is suffering because of the financial crisis and the neoliberalisation of Irish politics, and trying to find a way to build itself out whilst the opioid crisis rages around it. Each of these different characters has a different perspective. We meet them from each other's perspective and then see them the other way around. And I think it does a really good job of showing how the whole town is affected and of exploring like the ways the different characters interact with one another, the ways they see one another and see themselves. Characters that you didn't like when you saw them in a different perspective, you suddenly kind of come to understand them a bit more. But it is very short, and so I don't know if it kind of went into as much emotional depth as I think it could have. Some of the characters felt a little caricature-y, and at the same time I did also get a little confused at times as to what was actually happening, what was actually going on. There's kind of a spectacular ending, which I think, though it was foreshadowed, kind of felt like an easy get out. So I enjoyed the book, but I don't think it's a new favourite. I also finished The Woman Behind the Door by Roddy Doyle. It explores a relationship between a mother and a daughter, but when that mother was in an abusive relationship and an alcoholic, and now she is recovered, and her husband died 30 years ago, so she's no longer in that relationship either. And it's kind of her coming to terms with her past and what happened, and how what happened affected not only her but her children, and her children kind of coming to terms with this feeling of abandonment and the complicated feelings you have for a parent who was at once a victim and also the person putting you at harm, and dealing with addiction and things. And it is done through COVID and lockdown, and I think that this is a really good character study, and the voice of Paula, our main character, is really strong, and I really enjoyed being in her head. She's a very interesting character, very moving to read about, but also really funny and witty, and kind of that dark sardonic humour that I think a lot of people associate with Irish writers. Whilst I do again think that the reveal in this was a little bit of a damp squib, mostly I enjoyed it very much, and I think it was really well written, and always I am impressed when a male author is writing female characters and relationships between women well, because it is not that common. So I think that this does a pretty good job of that, and I enjoyed the relationship. I think he built that, particularly the relationship between Paula and Nicola, really well. The ways that they interact with one another, the ways that they can be so brutal and horrible to each other, but still have humour and love behind that, I think was really well done. I also finished Long Island, which I enjoyed. It started off being just from the perspective of Ailish, but then when we get back to Ireland, there are a couple of other perspectives that are brought in as well. I definitely think both The Woman in the Door and Long Island stand on their own as books. You can completely understand them. Because whilst Brooklyn will tell you the history that's behind Long Island, I think Long Island itself does a good job of feeling the weight of and the pressure of that history. So I think it was enjoyable to read anyway. And again, I think voice and character is something that Colm Toibin does really well. As I would say, don't read it if you want things to be explicit on the page, or you don't like ambiguity, because Colm Toibin is entirely ambiguous. He doesn't ever spell anything out, which I really enjoy. I think it makes for a much more powerful read because it feels much more real and less constructed. It brings to life these characters much better. Again, it's three characters who are in. It is a lot of characters who are in kind of a complicated situation. Ailish, something has gone on with her family in Long Island, her Italian husband. She finds out a secret, and that changes her life. And then she goes back to Ireland to visit her mother for her 80th birthday, and goes back, and it's about how you can never return. And it is definitely a book about emigration and the Irish history of being a nation of emigrants rather than a nation of immigrants. And I'm sorry, there's a dog who's asleep behind me, so if you can hear snoring, that's what that is. Beautiful, slow moving, really wonderfully told, and I really enjoy the ambiguity and the nobody is in the right, nobody is doing the right thing is the moral character. They're all good people trying very hard and struggling with situations, and it is very much about, not talking, concealing, hiding, thinking about judgment, and always trying to second guess what other people are doing, because nothing is laid out clear on the table. And if you don't enjoy that, then don't read this. But if you don't enjoy that, probably don't read Irish writers generally. I think that one was probably my favourite so far. I really enjoy the sort of slow stillness and the kind of way that Colm Toibin can use that stillness to be really piercing and incisive. I think that's really great. So I am going to start The Heart in Winter by Kevin Barry now. This one is historical fiction set in 1891 in Montana, quite different from the others, which have all been set at least partially in Ireland so far. Hello, I haven't spoken to you in 10 days because I had a truly awful cold, like cough cold situation. And so I just didn't feel like talking to you, was barely reading, to be perfectly honest. So I am halfway through 3 more of the books on this list that I want to talk to you about, but also because I was sick, I have not been knitting, and I am knitting a scarf for my dad for Christmas, and I am seeing him in a week, and this is how far I have got so far. I started today, so we'll see how this goes. He may be getting a scarf after Christmas, but I'm going to do my best to get this going. But it does mean that I have to knit and talk to you at the same time, because I do not have time to be spending not knitting. Thankfully, 2 of these books I've listened to as an audiobook, which makes perfect knitting companionship. The first one is Seaborn by Nuala O'Connor, and it is a historical fiction book about Anne Bonny, who was a female pirate from Ireland, but lived in a plantation in Virginia. At the moment I'm at the book so far, which is halfway, as I said, she's not a pirate yet, but she's married to a man who is sort of slightly involved in piracy, but she's not sure about that. And she's also had a relationship with a woman who was, I believe, enslaved, well, an indentured servant at least, on her father's plantation. It's not my favourite. Like, it is historical fiction, which I do enjoy, but as you probably know if you've watched any of my vlogs before, I'm fairly picky about my taste in historical fiction. Like, I care a lot about the writing style, and I feel like there is a lot of historical fiction that is like this one. So this is set in the 17th century, and it is about a woman who is in a man's world, and she is not like the other women who like to sew and get along with other women. Also, she's like kicking ass and complaining. That's the things she likes to do. And I just feel like it's a bit boring, these women empowerment historical fictions that are all the same. And I don't think that it has much in the way of style in terms of the writing, which I definitely think is very important to me. Like, it's fine, it's accomplished enough, but it's like Kate Moss or Maggie O'Farrell or Stacey Halls, any of these people, they are much more interested in writing women in this time period than in actually evoking the time period. They're just really similar, and I find them quite tiresome. They feel like they're very sort of individualist, liberal feminist. The character feels the same as all the women always do in these sorts of books. So I think it's one that a lot of people would like, because those sorts of books are very popular among historical fiction readers generally, but they are not exactly my vibe. Our London Lives by Dwyer Hickey. This one I am enjoying, although again it is very character focused. I think it's a lot more evocative of the time period. Anyway, so this is about 2 people. We have Millie and Pip. It flashes back and forth from their perspectives. Millie's perspective is starting in 1979, and at this point, in the midway point, we've got to 1995. And then Pip's perspective is in 2017, after he's just got out of rehab. And Millie, in the beginning, has just come over to London from Ireland. We're not really sure why, but it quickly becomes apparent that she's pregnant. Millie works in this pub, and Pip is a boxer who the boxing gym is right next to this pub, and so they frequent the pub. And the experience of being Irish in London during the Troubles has definitely been a big part of the first book. Neither of them are from the north, regardless their experience of being Irish and the treatment of Irish people. And then also things like mother and baby homes and alcoholism are definitely themes that are coming up. And yeah, as I said, I'm enjoying it. It's quite melancholy. I definitely think it's moving a bit faster than I would like throughout the time period. But in general, I think that bringing both of these characters to life, they both feel very real to me, and I think their voices are pretty strong. I think the Pip chapters are a bit better in that sense, in terms of depth and the way they're exploring the characters. I think in part that's because it's not covering the same time period as the Millie chapters. I'm interested to see where it goes. It's a very small, close story about how a city changes and the experience of being Irish in London, which for me personally is interesting because my family are Irish. Pip being like a young boy in London, born in the same year as my dad. My mum's experience of London in the 80s as a person from the north of Ireland. Yeah, I think there's some resonances there that touch me on a more personal level. The other one that I am halfway through now is The Heart in Winter by Kevin Barry. This one is set in Montana, so again it's historical fiction set in the 1890s. And it is about a guy called Tom, who is a writer, poet, a vagabond, kind of an oral tradition songwriter. It's definitely harking back to that Irish oral tradition. And then we also have Polly Gillespie, who has come to this mining town. So Tom writes letters to women for men from this mining town who want to get married. Polly is one of the women who has come to this town to kind of find a life after having been through some stuff in her past. She's not quite who she says she is. She marries this very, very religious man, but Tom is also a photographer's assistant. And when Polly comes to get her bridal photos taken, Tom and Polly meet and instantly feel this connection with each other. And Tom himself is also an opium addict, and there is a lot of drugs in this and drinking. It's definitely about like being poor in this kind of frontiery town in the 1890s, and there's a lot of poverty and wildness, and because it has that kind of oral tradition poetry aspect to it and also the drug aspect to it, the writing style it's taking me a while to get into each time, and I don't feel like I'm fully grasping it. It's kind of very off kilter. So where I said Seaborn doesn't have any style, this has too much style, I think. Just for me personally, I'm finding it hard to like grasp. I can kind of admire what it's doing, and on a sentence level sometimes I can be like enjoy the sentences, but I'm finding it hard to properly get into and get absorbed into the story, because I'm finding it quite jarring in terms of as a reading experience. I'm losing sense because it's focused more on style. It's been described on the back as being like Coen Brothers, Oh Brother Where Art Thou kind of vibe, and there is this kind of comedy to it. It's quite funny, but in a very dark black humour kind of way, and absurd at the same time, which I do normally enjoy, but as I said, I'm just struggling a little to get into. I feel like maybe I just need to sit down and read the rest of it like cover to cover, so that I'm probably not cover to cover, but from where I am to the back cover, so that I can sort of properly get into the style and enjoy it that way. But I will try and finish these and also this scarf and get back to you fairly soon, I think, probably, because I'm just going to be knitting for the rest of this weekend. We were supposed to go for a walk because it is my boyfriend's mum's birthday, so we were supposed to go for a walk today, but my boyfriend has the lurgy that I have just got over, and he cannot get out of bed, so that's not happening. I'm just going to knit away. Hello. So this vlog was supposed to have gone up ages ago, but between seasonal colds and the festive season, I have not spoken to you in ages, although I have finished the 3 other books that I was reading for this vlog. So the first one of those I'm going to talk to you about is this one, The Heart in Winter by Kevin Barry. So I talked to you about this when I was halfway through, and my feelings about this didn't really change. It is a book that should have been for me, definitely. It has a lot of the things I love. It's historical fiction written in a way that really evokes the time period. The voice is really, really strong, and it is telling a kind of strange, intimate story about these two people, and the kind of shenanigans they get up to. There's like taking shrooms in the forest, and there's a lot of like darkness and violence, but told with a kind of dark humour, which I tend to really enjoy in books. However, as I spoke about before, I was finding it difficult with the style of the writing. At times it really worked for me, it really flowed and I enjoyed it. And then at other times I just found it really hard to get into and really hard to concentrate on. And I don't know how much of that is me as a person, the time in which I'm reading it, my ability to absorb it. I feel like it's a writing style that some people would really, really love. And I feel like it's a writing style that I should have loved, but for some reason I didn't. Sometimes it was aiming for style over clarity, or if it is just that I was reading it, as I say, in an odd time period, or if it was like how much of it's the book and how much of it's me. Evening descended with some haste on Driggs, Idaho, as if it was of a mind to cover the place up. He rode the Palomino through the edges of town with a wariness to straighten his tired shoulders. He climbed down outside the bar he'd been warned about. The establishment was forlorn and menacing in about equal measure. There wasn't a Christian alive who'd have a brave feeling walking up to its doors. But Tom Rourke was possessed of mysterious calm by now, perhaps on lease from an old stranger the country had with some guile directed into his path, and he told the horse that it felt like an evening that was marked out for him somehow, or more precisely. By fate and dark magic, the evening was marked out. So it's really nice, and sometimes I was thinking about the way that the story is told, because Tom Rourke in this is a balladeer, someone who writes like stories, ballads, poems, and I think there is a lot in the style of this writing that is calling back to the oral tradition of Irish writing, how related a lot of Irish writing is to an oral and musical tradition that is part of the culture, and I think that there is a lot about this that is doing that, and so I think perhaps it's a shame that this was the only one I couldn't find the audiobook for. I think perhaps I would have enjoyed it more that way, because I think that there is a lot about that in here. Seaborn, on the other hand, didn't work for me either, but I definitely think that was the book more than me. So that one had the most sort of straightforward, simple style of writing for me out of all of the books that were on this list. It was the one that felt the most commercial, and so it was a lot. It's the kind of historical fiction that I find quite grating, where it is just about women from historical periods doing it for themselves, a kind of individualistic feminism, kind of a liberal feminist worldview that I think is in place on show in a lot of women writing historical fiction about other women, and I don't really appreciate it, and particularly when the style was doing nothing to evoke that time period. Also, it's about sapphic female pirates, and I feel like it should have been more fun. Like the first more than half of this book was not really about her being a pirate, because the real life character that it's based on was only known to be actively a pirate for less than a year. But like, it's a fictionalized version. We could have focused more on the piracy. And it was, even when it did do the piracy, a lot of it was just like sailing around waiting for things to happen and it not being as exciting as she'd hoped. And then the whole book was just not as exciting as I'd hoped. Like, it was just kind of boring. And that's a shame. I found this book, to be really plain and boring. And whilst there was nothing super clunky about the writing style, there was nothing super interesting about it either. It just felt a bit flat to me. I think I've basically said everything that I feel about it. It was too long and really boring. Our London Lives by Dwyer Hickey. I did enjoy this book. Again, it is one that my halfway review is kind of my whole review. The two storylines, the two time periods did end up converging, but we knew that was going to happen because the two characters interact in both time periods before the moment of convergence. It's a very small slice of life story, but I feel like the historical bit in the 70s and 80s was done a little bit of a disservice, was kind of jumped over to get to the convergence of it much more in this time period. And so there was a lot about being an unmarried mother and sexual abuse and being Irish in London during the Troubles that I felt like was glossed over and could have been given a bit more prominence in the book. But apart from that, yes, I did think it was enjoyable, very well written, very good voices. I would say that I felt like a lot of the kind of darker secrets parts that slowly get exposed were a little too obvious and heavy-handed. Kind of in the way they're kind of thrown in, but with a lot of heavy-handed foreshadowing that I felt like was doing a bit too much. I didn't really love that. And so it's not one of my favourite books, but I definitely think if you enjoy kind of a slice of life look at history through the perspective, through an intimate perspective of specific characters, and when there is a kind of very there is a lot of specificity to the book about Irish people in London in the latter half of the 20th century, and alcohol abuse and a disconnect where you are perceived and the way that you are, and little touches on kind of domestic history. I think that this one would be one that you would enjoy. Things like still life, I guess. I would say still life is more successful than this, but it is kind of in the same genre, in the same ballpark. So as this video is coming out way later, we already know who won. Intermezzo is the one that I would have chosen
myself out of all of them as the one that I enjoyed the most. It was interesting to read some more Irish fiction, although it is not particularly diverse in terms of the types of Irish fiction it is looking at. So reading all the stories back to back is perhaps less enjoyable than when you are reading like the other prizes that have a bit more scope to them in terms of subjects and themes and ideas. There was a lot in this about storytelling, Irish storytelling tradition. I suppose if you're an Irish writer, that is something that is going to come up. There's a lot of a similar tone to a lot of the books, which I think is an enjoyable tone. It's one that I like, but reading 6 books that are all in a very similar tone, aside from maybe the Seaborn one, but the other ones all being in a fairly similar tone. But let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Have you read any of these books? Do you have any thoughts about Irish writers? I may be planning a video about that next year. Thank you for watching. If you are new here, my name's Roisin. Thank you very much for watching, and please do subscribe if you would like to stick around. Thank you for watching. Bye bye.